Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session on the role of financial institution in shifting the food system. So my name is Marianne. I'm going to be your moderator, and we're going to be together over the next hour and a half. My role is that I'm nature-related finance lead at Global Canopy, and then I've been leading the TNFD sector-specific work on the food system. And the food system accounts for 80% of biodiversity loss, terrestrial biodiversity loss. So it's therefore a sector that needs to play the same role for the nature transition as energy is for climate. We just can't get around it. It needs to transition. But the world food system is also worth $8 trillion US. So it's a massive transition opportunity for the financial sector. But its negative impacts is priced at 12 trillion a year. So it's also a very big risk and liability. So we need to understand how we work with this. And to do this, we have a very competent panel of practitioners and financial service institutions with us today, whom you see here on stage. So we have right next to me, we have Jessica Smith. She's the nature-related finance lead of UNEP FI. Then next to Jessica, we have Melanie Belaye. Am I saying it correctly?
Baylor, yes.
Yes, who's Sustainability Equity Fund Manager at EFG Asset Management. And next to Melanie, we have Victoria Laguette, who's Equity Fund Manager and Head of Impact Investing at Union Bancaire Privée. And we also have the pleasure to have one of the TNFD members join us today. That is Sebastian Soleil, who is Global Head of Energy Transition and Environment at BNP Paribas. But we really want to make this session more than sort of a one-way conversation. We want to engage you as much as possible in the conversation. So even though you can see here is the run of show today, you can see that we have Q&A at the end, so it's really the traditional layout, but we would like to encourage everyone, just as we have seen in the big conversation, for you to also raise your hand to engage also outside of the Q&A. If there's anything that bothers you or anything you want to contribute, we really want to engage you as much as possible. Yeah, I won't do too much discussion on this one. But we would like to engage you from the beginning. So I would like to invite all of you to bring out your smartphone and to scan the picture or the QR code. And you will be met by two questions on the Slido, which we would like to ask you to kindly put your thinking into. Hope it works. Yeah? Great. So which city are you based in, and what type of organization are you working for? So we have a very global audience, definitely. Of course, with more from Geneva and Zurich, of course, more Swiss-based, but we have people from all over Europe. We have from Africa. Do we have any from South America? Some have put in their institutions. Lagos, we have India. That's excellent. And we have different types of institutions. We have retail banks, we have investors, we have impact investors. So a very, very good mix. I think we're ready to go to the next question. Do you know approximately how much biodiversity loss on land and water food systems are responsible for? You're definitely in the high end, all of you, whether it's 80 or whether it's 50. I think we have, or 60. Well, according to science, it's 80 actually, so I think we all agree it's a lot anyway. It's a material sector. We're ready to go to the next. From your perspective, what is the first topic to address when it comes to finance and sustainable food systems? And that's something we will definitely bring to the panel to take into the conversation. So if there's a specific topic you would like them to reflect on, or just that you think is important, please do add it. And the IMF. This is going to be a very rich conversation, I sense. We have everything from financing instruments to agricultural practices to institutional reform up here on the slide. So this is absolutely brilliant. And I cannot promise we'll touch on all of them, but we will definitely dive into quite a number of them. And I think water for sure, that seems to be one we cannot not talk about in this session. And value chains, of course, traceability, food waste. Let's keep those in mind when we go to the conversation. Thank you so much. And to set the scene, we have the pleasure, before we go into unpacking these concepts, to have Jessica, nature lead of UNEP-FI, and she's promised to give us sort of a very broad-brushed outline of the food system to begin with. Here you go. Over to you, Jessica.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And the food conversation timed after lunch, I think this is a perfect moment to revisit the good, the bad, and the finance opportunity of our food systems. But first of all, what are food systems? Food systems are everything to do with the production and consumption and dealing with waste around food. So it includes transportation, packaging, production. And as Mariana indicated, this is a huge part of our global economies. And I'll start off, first of all, with the good. Now, I don't need to do too much convincing of the good, I think, to anyone. Food is central to our lives, to our culture, to our society. If you open up the phone that you have in front of you and look at your photo stream, you'll probably see birthday parties and holidays, and food will be somewhere in all of that. Now, at least half of the people in the world today are in households that are directly involved in food production, and the rest of us are indeed all indirectly involved in some way or another. So I've put a couple photos up here from my family farm in southwestern Ontario, Canada, and we had a bumper corn harvest this year, and that's my son looking out there on the right-hand side. So all of us are involved in the food system in some way, if not only as consumers, and it is a major part of our economies. It is 12% of global GDP in the food system. And indeed, this is a part of our economies that we cannot divest away from. Human beings will always need some form of food in some format, transported whether locally or traded internationally. And it is today the world's largest source of employment, including the majority of jobs and livelihoods in the emerging markets. Now, the bad is a more challenging conversation. Right now, the UN Secretary General tells us that our food systems are broken. We see food absolutely central in some of the major impact challenges that we face today. Climate change, nature loss, pollution, poverty, and suboptimal outcomes for human health and well-being. I'm going to deep dive into these 4 pillars a little bit. I think some of you will know some of these stats, but hopefully there's something new here, and we can also understand the interconnections between them. So first of all, in terms of climate change, you may know already that around 1/3 of our greenhouse gas emissions come from land use change and agriculture. You may not be aware that 9 out of 10 major crops are experiencing reduced yield because of climate change. Also, the ocean is our largest heat and carbon sink, but currently it is being affected by acidification and heating. And this summer, ocean acidification and ocean temperatures were shockingly off the charts. So in fact, we are undermining an ally in the fight against climate change through our food systems. As Mariana mentioned, 80% of biodiversity loss is driven by unsustainable food systems, including 70% of terrestrial biodiversity. 70% of our global freshwater is used for agriculture, and around half of habitable land. Around 80% of this is used for livestock and its feed, and many studies are suggesting that if we move more towards plant-based diets, we will need less of this land to feed more people. You may not know that actually indigenous peoples are around 5% of the world's population, and they are stewarding 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity in their food systems primarily. And we are, as a society, not supporting these groups, and many of them face attacks, many of them face insecure tenure and major conflicts. So the front line of where we see biodiversity in the world is in conflict with our unsustainable food systems and other development approaches. Also, you may have heard headlines around soil biodiversity and the debatable number of harvests that we have left. What is undebatable is that we are depleting the soils that feed us. Now, in terms of pollution, 8 to 10% of all greenhouse gas emissions are linked to food waste. So food waste is an enormous problem. And again, it's possible that we could be closing our loops and having an ally in fighting climate change within the way that we process and consume food. 4 of the major plastics in our waterways are food packaging. The 4 top are food packaging. And we're also hearing headlines of microplastics and nanoplastics entering our food chains. So I've focused on 3 environmental impact areas, and as UNEP, we call this the triple planetary crisis: climate change, nature loss, and pollution. But I would be remiss to not discuss also the human side of the food system and the suboptimal outcomes. So right now, 780 million people face hunger, 3 billion cannot afford healthy diets, and 2 billion are overweight or obese. 20% of deaths today are attributed to dietary factors, and most of the subsidies that we have going into the food system are pointing towards these unsustainable outcomes. So indeed, I think we would have to agree with the Secretary General that our food systems are currently broken, and there is much more that we can do. And 3 years after the UN Secretary General's Food Systems Summit, this summer, he conducted a stock take of where we are. And the findings were that we're not moving fast enough. Are you surprised? No. But there is enough capital in the world. We just need to redeploy it more in line with the objectives that we have agreed as a society for sustainability and human well-being. Now, earlier this year, UNEP-FI with partners published Driving Finance for Sustainable Food Systems. It is a roadmap both for individual financial institutions and also policymakers, how we can rewire our financing to the food system more sustainably. There are a lot of solutions, and many are being discussed at Building Bridges, which is very exciting, and some of the panel will talk about some of the solutions that they're financing, but many of them are around the idea of regenerative agriculture and circular economy in our food systems. There's around 350 billion missing to act on food system sustainability every year, but the returns are expected to be in the order of trillions of benefits and jobs created from investing in sustainable food systems. Now, there are opportunities to better manage and price risk, and we heard quite a lot about the TNFD this morning and yesterday, which was very exciting, and quite a lot of new products that can be developed, particularly in the debt market, which this report focuses very much on. And today we're going to hear a little bit more about secondary markets as well. So there is indeed a lot of opportunity for the financial sector to do more to move at pace. Now, something that I've been doing at home lately is I have 2 kids. They're 7 and 10 years old. They have quite a lot of interest in the future state of our planet. They've asked me if I share a little bit about the work that I do with them. And in fact, I ran through the presentation with them. And what they said to me was, you know what, adults are just always talking. Kids are actually doing things. Why don't you focus on something that kids are doing? And they said, why don't you talk about Plant for the Planet? And I'm going to come back to the Good Food Finance Network briefly, but Plant for the Planet is a chocolate bar, a sustainable chocolate bar that's being sold. I don't know how many units they've sold, but it's enough to purchase and plant around 9 million trees. And this is a kid-owned, kid-driven company. And I did do my due diligence before presenting this. They're actually supported by UNEP and FAO in the restoration decade. So I thought that was a great example of an emerging idea and venture that was brought forward by kids who have a huge stake in our future planet. But I will mention something that Unipify is doing. We partner with EAT, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and ATNI, the Access to Nutrition Initiative, in something called the Good Food Finance Network. And GFFN is doing 3 things. One is that we are advocating for more finance towards sustainable food systems. Second of all, we have a high ambition group where a range of financial institutions, public and private, have set portfolio-wide targets across a number of impact areas related to food systems and are showing the way of how they can be delivered in finance. And the third, at COP28, we will be launching a new co-investment fund, which will be catalyzing more funding towards sustainable food finance. So I think I'll hand over there to Marianne, and I hope I've set the stage in quite a general way, and now we're going to delve in quite a bit more into the specifics of some solutions, including from some of the panelists.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And what a great job in setting sort of the backdrop and also diving back into solutions where we'll pick up now in terms of what's the practices. We know it's early days, but what's unfolding in the asset management side and also the banking side. So Melanie, we saw yesterday a show of hands in the big room when Morema was presenting the TNFD framework. There was a question to how many of you have climate strategies and how many of you integrate nature into these climate strategies. And it was actually a pretty good and an impressive raise of hands we saw there. So I would like to pose the same question for you, Melanie, which is really how do you approach the climate transition at EFG, and how does the role of nature, and especially related to the food sector, of course, play in that?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mariana. And yeah, climate transition for us at EFG is something where we take a holistic approach to. So for us, we say, you know, we're today more the stage of a linear economy, maybe gradually moving to a circular economy. And where we have to go is a regenerative economy. So that really takes a holistic approach that allows the economy, but also society and the environment to thrive, to flourish. So we see this climate transition, so this transition to a regenerative economy, as the largest transformation of our economy since the Industrial Revolution. So that's the holistic part. And when we invest in the climate transition, so I'm the manager of the Climate Transition Equity Fund at EFG, we invest along 7 transition sectors, which we think are actually a major part of the problem today, but are also the ones that contribute to a successful transition, that enable a successful transition. So we have like the usual suspects, like the power generation sector, transport sector in that, but very importantly also the agriculture sector where we invest in, so which is about the transition to a regenerative food system. And as Jessica mentioned, if agriculture is responsible for 70% of global freshwater use, we might look at global water technology companies, or for example at large F&B manufacturers that might develop new technologies that allow, for example, coffee breeding that allows for more productivity, for more drought resistance, so solutions like that.
Thank you so much. And now turning that to Victoria and sort of going down that line of getting more and more specific on the food system. So you, as a portfolio manager, how do you sort of more practically work with transitioning and working with the food system in general?
Thank you. And can you all hear me at the back? Thank you. I'm the head of impact at UBP. And for UBP, that's effectively a listed equity role. So I'm looking through the secondary markets lens at really at climate and biodiversity, nature, and the food system is a really, it's exciting. I mean, to go to some of Jessica's points, it's also a very frightening, but fortunately investable way to access biodiversity loss and hopefully then biodiversity restoration. So we look at the food system right across the value chain. So we are looking at disruptive, typically smaller businesses that are providing solutions. And we're also looking more upstream at more established, typically larger businesses which have very complex supply chains, and seeing how our active ownership and collaboration with these businesses can help improve both the upstream and then the downstream, the consumption part of their business.
Thank you so much. And now going to the banking side, Sebastian, and in your title, it doesn't say anything nature or food. It actually talks about energy and the energy transition. So can you share with us how you in your work see the role of the food sector in this transition that we want?
Yeah, so as what said at the beginning on the question, there's a big topic on supply chain, obviously, because the impact on nature, the impact on biodiversity of our clients are all along their supply chain, so we have a big issue on traceability. So what do we do as a bank? Several things. So we really want to help our clients in their transition. So the first step is to decrease the negative impacts. So we have sector policy, especially one on agriculture, and with specific criteria for two very high impact supply chain. That is supply chain of soy and beef coming from Brazil and more specifically the Cerrado and the Amazon regions. So for these two supply chain, we committed that by 2025, we will finance only clients with 100% traceability in their supply chain for these two commodities, and with zero deforestation in their supply chain by 2025. So obviously, to get to this commitment, we have to discuss thoroughly and with our clients, which is what we do currently, and we'll see what happens by 2025. So that's on the negative side, so we have to decrease the negative impact. But we have as well to help our clients in their positive actions. So we develop more and more specific sustainable finance tools to accompany our clients in their transition. So for instance, last year, we concluded a sustainable bond with Carrefour, so the retail company, for an amount of 1.5 billion euros with two targets, one on reducing packaging and the other one on reducing food waste. We have seen at the beginning that food waste was important. And we have more specific tools. For instance, we are a very big agriculture bank in Poland. We are the leader of the market there. And there we try to help our clients. And for instance, we develop a tool, an internet tool, Agronomist, to help our clients and any farmers actually calculate their carbon and biodiversity and water footprint. Yes, so any clients in the farming industry. So calculate assess their carbon and water footprint over there to help them monitor their impacts. And so we have to foster innovation as well. So we have an envelope of more than 200 million euros dedicated to startups in the ecological transition. And some of these startups are dedicated to improving the agriculture and agro-food system. So there is a startup, Phoenix, that fights food waste and food poverty. There is Protix that promotes insect-based food and these kind of things. So we really have to implement all this to be able to have a holistic view on this transition for the agriculture sector.
Thank you so much, Sebastian, and also for giving a good segue into the next part of the discussion, which is exactly that some of those pure play companies that are on alternative proteins, that are on producing proteins which are non-soil dependent, etc., they're quite small, and they're quite early stage, and they're quite high risk, and they're sort of not a big part of your portfolio, probably, right? So not yet, exactly. And so there's a time horizon which we don't have a long pathway, as we've heard. We can't take the same time to transition as we're doing with the energy sector, with the food sector. It needs to go quicker. So we also need to transition those companies, the big ones that have designed the TNFD, etc., and do that quickly. So there's definitely an asset management role, manager role, and especially on the active engagement and what really works there. So I would like to talk to you and ask you to share with us, Melanie, on how are you using specifically your influence as a fund manager to help transition some of the bigger listed companies that are really part of the 80% problem to be lesser part of the 80% problem?
So yeah, thanks for the question, and I fully agree. I mean, the small companies are the exciting ones maybe, and it's very, just impressive to hear what they're developing, what they're working on. But I think we also need a little bit more the boring companies maybe, the large cap companies, because they are often also part of the problem, but we need them to transition. So for a successful transition, we need the large companies as well, because they have the money right now, they have the power right now, so if they change their behavior, we can maybe also see some change now, and that's what we need. And me as a fund manager, what we do is just maybe the nitty-gritty work. So we talk with companies, so we meet them, we try to better understand where do they stand. So for example, why didn't they issue yet SBTi validated targets, for example? There might be good reasons for it. So, for example, if a company waits until it also has a tangible climate action plan in place until it comes out with such commitments, that might be an okay reason. If they just don't care and don't want to put in the work, not so great. We just ask questions, have discussions, and what's quite impressive for me often is, just simple questions. Who answers them? Is it the CEO because he's really engaged and passionate about the topic and really wants to show what they're doing, the projects that are developing? Or it's more like, okay, could you please take over because the sustainability questions, I don't like them that much. So this gives you already some indication. And then for sure, a meeting with management is also the platform to just tell them, what is important for us as investors. For example, we approve of your net zero 2050 targets, but actually what we need is more tangible short-term targets as well. We would like to see a climate action plan. We would like to see granular, specific, quantitative targets. It's great that you start with scope 1 and 2 emissions because, start where are the low-hanging fruits maybe, but then you have a whole supply chain, for example. as such a big company, we would expect you to also take action on this level. So these are just these discussions that we're having, and I think this is something everyone can do, every investor can do that has company access. Then we often have the issue that we're not holding 10-20% of these companies in most cases. So what we do then is we do a collective engagement. So we collaborate with other investors, with other stakeholders, so that we can make sure our voice is heard. We also can engage then in a more formal way. So for example, what we did is we joined an engagement where we were stakeholders holding together over 12 trillion of assets under management, so quite significant. And we engaged then with the largest buyer of beef in the world. And so it concerned their antibiotics use in their supply chain. They made a strong commitment, but they didn't follow through. It was delayed. They stopped engaging with stakeholders, talking with stakeholders. So this engagement helped to make sure, also with a delay, they held up their commitment. And yeah, they started again talking with all of us. So yeah, that's what we're doing to really take over.
Can I just follow up on one? So very interesting, and making it so concrete on the antibiotics use and for the collective engagement case. So how did you choose, because there are so many other nature-related negative impacts associated with beef production, deforestation of tropical rainforest, others. So what made you zoom in on that material issue for collective engagement on antibiotics? Can you help us on that journey a bit?
I mean, the quick answer is you have to start somewhere. So with this topic, everything is so complex that you can often say, okay, it's too complex now, too difficult now, so we just wait a bit until there's one solution and we just focus on this one. So yeah, you have to start somewhere. Usually in our case, it starts with companies where we want to invest, where we are invested, where we see, okay, but this particular aspect is preventing us from bigger investment or just investing at all, so that might be a trigger. And then there are these days many also opportunities to join collective groups, you know, to coordinate engagement.
Thank you so much, and it would be great, Victoria, if you can help us also take us further down that journey in terms of, we heard that it's excluded you from putting in more funds or more assets because of the nature-related negative impacts, both on how you engage positively, but also on potential exclusions in this space, and what are some of the areas for you of concern?
Sure. I mean, in order to not repeat everything that you've just heard, I mean, it might be worth building a little bit on that active engagement piece, because I think if you're working in secondary markets and you have the aim to help contribute to systems change, and I guess that's one of the reasons we're all here today, then that engagement piece is really the biggest and most important lever that we have. And so exclusion is a factor with some of our funds, but it's really not where we spend our energy. I guess 90% of our energy is on engaging with our holdings or potential holdings. And you know, I think everyone's now accustomed to engagement being a bilateral conversation. Maybe it's based around a certain issue and there are escalation points, etc. And we do that. We also participate in a number of collaborative initiatives, because for sure, many heads can sometimes be more powerful. Many assets can be more powerful, and so that can be very effective. But on the particular topic of nature, and so in this case, this comes back to food systems. We really wanted to try and do something perhaps even more radical than that, or something slightly different, because it really felt, looking at the stats that you've produced for us today, and talking to companies. So on one hand, you've got corporates who are maybe less so over the last 6 to 12 months with the introduction of TNFD CSRD requirements, etc., companies are beginning to have language around nature and disclose around nature a little bit, but we're still very, very early stage. But broadly, for our potential holding companies in listed markets, the level of knowledge and certainly the level of action is still relatively low. And then on the other side, you have NGOs with so much experience, so much knowledge, so many answers to so many of the questions, and it felt like, and then in the middle you have finance who just do their thing, right? They don't really talk to anyone else, and I mean, there are always exceptions, but it really felt like getting all of these stakeholders into the same room could be really powerful, because let's face it, what we've been doing so far hasn't really worked. And so our active ownership around nature and the food system has focused specifically on having fee-sharing arrangements with certain NGOs. We work with Cambridge Conservation Initiative, CCI, and we work with Peace Parks Foundation, and also we're a member of the Investment Leaders Group, which is part of CISL, and bringing those people into the same room as a select number of corporates along the food value chain. We had a workshop last year which was really powerful. So we had a farm equipment manufacturer, a global US listed one, a US food retailer, and 2 food producers, all in the same room, talking about the challenges of, what is the limiting factor to developing a more nature-positive business. And having them in the same space, having the NGOs there, meant that the conversation was much more productive than it would have been. I strongly believe that if we had talked to them bilaterally and they hadn't had the support of their peers, or I guess in some senses competitors, and we had an outcome. We actually had an outcome from that conversation as a starting point, which was there are 3 major issues. One is we're really confused about regulation and where we start, and today could be quite helpful for some of those people. 2 is even if we get the regulation, we're confused about which methodology to use and how to measure, and are we doing the same thing as our peers? And the third thing, which actually really surprised me, is they broadly felt that the consumers, if they were consumer-facing businesses, they felt that the consumer was not connecting as much with nature as with climate, and they were struggling to find ways to make nature resonate to their end customer base. And so we've taken those 3 topics and worked closely since then with our NGOs and with the academics through CISL and Cambridge. And we have an event coming up in November to focus on those 3 topics specifically. And anyone who would like to come, please find me afterwards, and you'll be very welcome. It's in London on the November the 22nd. To try and really get some real-world solutions to what can end up being quite academic conversations if you're not careful.
Thank you so much, Victoria, and also for that invitation. I'm sure many will pick that up, and for sharing with us how you innovated the process of active engagement, actually, broadening it out much more to invite the NGO community. I would also like to extend an invitation to you to engage with the panel. If there's anything you've heard or anything you want to learn more about, or just pose a question, then please just raise your hand. And yes, the lady here.
Thank you so much. What a fantastic session. And I also listened to some of you last week with the biodiversity session you had on TNFD. On food security specifically.
Can you just present who you are then?
Oh, sure, sorry. Monique Matthijs-Graaf from Willis Towers Watson, so representing the asset owner community and investment consultants. But my question relates to probably a follow-up from the session on impact investing in private equity we had, where the question was raised around what are the returns we can expect it to see. There's a willingness and an eagerness to be able to allocate more capital, but we need to understand what that represents. So food security is a substantive issue and agenda. We'd love to be able to support in mobilizing more capital, but it would be wonderful if you could unpack a little bit more about the returns, how investors can expect to see it manifest in their portfolio, contributing to risk targets and return outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Who wants to take that one with some reflections?
I would say I can take the question, but I think it's a little bit premature at this moment because I think we're still in a moment where there's, an example here, an example here. We're not quite getting to the scale where we can say, this is a typical return in this asset class. But I do think the examples are coming, fast and furious. And actually, my colleagues have a session on Thursday looking at some of the UNEP-supported funds and blended finance facilities and what have been invested in and what were the returns for those ones. So that's on Thursday. So I think they'll delve a little bit more into that. But I do think we are seeing, exciting sort of business-ready businesses and scaling quickly, and I do feel that there is quite a lot of momentum in this space. I think where the challenges that we are getting to is in terms of being able to find solutions that are also equitable for those who are land stewards and smallholders. And I think one of the points that we see a lot with the food system is it is very dispersed. And so I think that the solutions around fintech are also really exciting in this space to be able to unlock solutions at scale. So I think there's quite a lot of interesting examples in some of the community sessions as well on that point.
Yeah, so your question is very interesting, but very wide. So I cannot give you either returns, typical returns for this class, asset class for the time being, but what I can try and do is to give a few ideas on what are the main topics in this asset class. So obviously fintech is very important, satellite observation or monitoring of the soil quality, this kind of thing, or precise needs of the soil, water needs, all these kind of things. So fintech, agtech companies are developing, are booming, and they do very interesting things. There is a lot of things on the food waste because it's still a very huge topic. There is more and more things coupling, generating carbon credit and preserving biodiversity and soil quality. So how can a company generate more money by at the same time preserving biodiversity and sequestering carbon, and so generating and selling carbon credits? It's another type of activity. There's quite a lot of activity on water preservation as well, which is a huge and growing topic. And I lost my last idea. No. So many different types of activities in this asset class, but I think there are more and more things to do.
Thank you so much, Sebastian. We have another question out here.
Yes, thank you so much. It's also for you, Mr. Sébastien. So my name is Massa. I'm actually the rapporteur for this session. So hello, everyone. Thank you for the enriching discussions. I just had a question. You raised a very interesting point, particularly regarding the provision of particular strategies for agricultural communities and small stakeholder farmers, particularly in asset management or reducing their carbon footprint. But I was just wondering, because it's very intriguing, because the main challenge in that is already something that's already on the table, which is the access to finance by these agricultural communities, and given also the statistics that have been produced before on how important it is for us to address community engagement, particularly focusing on indigenous communities, I was just wondering if there are specific strategies or mechanisms that are being particularly discussed now or already in implementation in order to improve accessibility of these strategies or technologies for these farmers, because I find that it's a challenging point. Maybe the objective is generally there, but in terms of particular strategies, it's still a little bit lacking on the implementation point. So I was just wondering if that is something that is being technically discussed in terms of access to finance for these communities, and also for these technologies that allows them to manage their assets, but also to calculate the carbon footprints, which is usually a very financially intensive mechanism. And thank you so much.
Yeah, so many things to do. We are only at the beginning. I can give you one example. For instance, BNP Paribas is quite involved in microfinance, especially for small farmers. And until now, so we have been involved in microfinance for several decades now. And most of the time, when we discuss with institution of microfinance, what we try to do is help them assess the financial reliability of their clients. So their clients who get the microcredit, will they be able to reimburse the credit? So that was what we have done for decades. And we developed with a small NGO a few years ago a new tool, so taking into account in this assessment of the client, not only the capacity to reimburse the credit, but the resilience to climate change and biodiversity. And so it's very important because, okay, the more resilient they get, the better it is for them. And anyhow, financially speaking, it's a good investment as well, because if they are not resilient to climate change and biodiversity, in the end, they won't be able to reimburse their credit. So we develop a tool to help institutions of microfinance assess climate and biodiversity resilience of their clients. And I think it's very important to a first step to really raise awareness on these topics for small farmers and show them that it's not only local communities that do something for the wealthy peoples of the north, but it's also their own interest. They have to do it if they want to be able to produce the same yields in 1 year, 2 years, 4 years, 6 years.
Thank you so much, Sebastian. We have one question here, then the last one here, and then we'll... over to you.
All right, thank you to all the panelists. My name is Fernando Libano. I work at the International Labour Organization, the ILO. Very nice to be here. My question, I have two questions. The first one actually relates to the one that was just asked, which is the fact that we typically say that funding gaps for the SDGs and also for this topic, they're typically not in developed economies. And the things that we talked about here, most of the time, they're related to public equities or bonds, which are features of more developed capital markets. But a big part of the issue that we're looking at actually takes place in emerging markets, private companies, SMEs, which are sometimes informal, and smallholder farmers, as already mentioned. So I wonder, what does the panel see as the role for the financial sector in this context? What can be done to get there, issues of local currency financing and others? And the second question is on the topic of just transition. So for the ILO, just transition is a very important topic, which basically means looking at the social side of all these transitions. For instance, the green transition will create jobs, will destroy jobs. Those are very localized impacts, very different for different stakeholders experimenting it. When it comes to food production, probably if you stop financing a specific value chain and start financing another, people will lose their livelihoods, their incomes as a consequence of that. So I wonder, when it comes to engagement and the engagement examples that you referred to, how frequently and how does the social aspects actually come up when you're discussing climate transition plans and other actions? I'm seeing Jessica nodding here because we also work with UNEP-FI on some of these fronts on just transition and finance. Thank you.
Want to take that?
Maybe I can take the first part of that, and you might have some input on the climate transition. It's true that we've talked a lot about secondary markets, and that immediately leads you to think of large cap businesses typically listed in the developed world. But the listing of the business is not where its impact begins and ends. And so, particularly for the companies that operate, multinational companies that operate in the food space, they have huge, sprawling supply chains that reach right upstream to, in some cases, thousands of smallholders. And in engaging with those companies, if they are thinking in the way that, in a positive way about this, then it's an incredibly powerful way to generate small changes all across the globe from a supply chain perspective. But also there is a downstream difference as well. Yes, the companies may be listed, not always, but may be listed in developed markets, but also where they generate their revenues can be much broader based than where they're listed. These are, in many cases, we're investing in truly multinational businesses with, I don't have the figures for the entire fund at the top of my head, but for sure, there are many companies that have the majority of their sales in emerging markets, whereas they are wholly listed, let's say, in the US or the UK. So there is, I just think that's an important contextual point, that multinationals or developed businesses, it doesn't mean that they don't have, or you can't get leverage to emerging market issues with that. And on the social side, I'm sure my fellow panelist has something to say, but actually it's not quite the point of your question, but I do think about the social side too in the sense of nutrition. And, you know, I think we're increasingly talking about how climate and nature are linked, but I really think it should be people, nature and climate. And that people part, yes, it's making sure that this is a just transition and that the jobs, if anything, the job opportunities increase with this shift. But it's also, you know, going back to the point about consumer interest and consumer awareness around the nature piece and how many corporates say that it's lacking. Maybe if we talked about, there is an increasing body of evidence that superior soil quality produces more nutritious food. And maybe we should really begin, or certainly maybe we should be engaging more heavily with food companies to do more research and to push that angle much more substantially, so that it really is instilling in people the understanding that what's good for the soil is good for us too.
Yeah, so absolutely share your opinion. I think for us the starting point is climate as climate change. The issue focuses on the transition, and the end goal, like the regenerative economy, that actually not only considers the environment but also society, so is expected to have a positive impact for all three systems, so economy, society and environment. So there it comes together. But when we start with our investment process, where we have data, tangible data, we are usually like forced to start on the environmental pillar, so that's where we start. But the quantitative angle is not sufficient, right? So that's our starting point, and then it becomes very quickly very qualitative, where you have to understand the company bottom up, where you have to speak, discuss with the company, and then at this stage, I would say everything comes a little bit more together, so you don't think in these silos anymore, but for example, discuss with a company, as you mentioned, you have this big power responsibility as this multinational company to also use your influence in your supply chain. So not only to demand things, but to help them, you know, with processes, with standards, with knowledge, with tools. So that's what we see as well, and that's where we can focus in a qualitative, one-on-one way. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Melanie. And we'll just take one question before we have to move on to the next theme of the discussion, from what can the financial community do itself to more enabling conditions. So, sir, the last question of this round.
Thank you, Christian Frutiger from the Swiss Development Agency. And maybe that question will help bridge that discussion. We've heard that global players or big players of the food systems, whether they sell their products in the north or in the south, have much of their value chains in low and lower middle income countries. And yet, agriculture is the most underinvested areas in exactly these countries. In other words, the risks and the cost for production are basically outsourced to the weakest link in the chain, the smallholder farmer at the very end. So when you engage and when you seek that leverage, time has now come that farmers simply stop producing. Either they're no longer willing to produce because there is not enough income, or they can no longer produce because of climate change, and or other reasons, and we've seen the figures. So isn't it simply about hedging future risk and getting these players of the international food system to invest where actually their lifeblood comes from?
Great question. Who wants to take a few reflections on that, Sebastian?
Yes, great question, and I fully agree, but it's come back to the main questions of the last two COPs on climate and biodiversity. So the whole topic, the core of the topic is how to orient financial flows for the north to the south to enable this transition to preserve biodiversity and fight climate change. So it's very important to find the right ways to orient these financial flows from north to south. There are several of them. So first thing is we as a European player, we have to discuss with our clients and to make sure that the transition, sustainable and just transition, goes all the way to the supply chain. So we have to discuss with the client to make sure that, okay, when in Paris or in Geneva we buy some beef, to what extent both the risk and the opportunities are really trickling down the whole supply chain, and it's quite tricky. That's why traceability is very important, and we discuss quite a lot on it with our clients. So that's the first point: traceability along the supply chain. Second point: what are the most convenient and efficient means to finance the fight against climate change and the preservation of biodiversity in these countries. So I'm a true believer in the power of carbon credits and maybe one day biodiversity credits. For the time being, I think it's one of the most efficient way we have found. It's not perfect, there are many flaws, but it's the most efficient way we have found for northern companies to bring money to southern farmers who can generate carbon and biodiversity benefits. So we have to find many other ways. For the timing, this way I think is quite efficient, but obviously we have to find many other ways.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that question. It was a wonderful bridge exactly to the framework conditions, because one thing is, of course, if you're hedging against the future, that's too far out, right? Then it's the tragedy of the horizon again, just on nature. And of course, there the enabling conditions can come in and shorten that time horizon by for instance, the deforestation-free directive in the EU, which currently does not cover FIs, but real economy corporates that are financed. So I would like to stay with you, Sebastian, just for a few more seconds or minutes on how you are, and especially relating to that question from the gentleman, now on your deforestation-free sort of journey. Does that mean that you see that you are, how does that change sort of, does that mean higher risk pricing for those clients that are at risk, or does that mean sort of new types of loans? How are you engaging with such a requirement at the moment?
Yeah, so we have many ways to engage. First way, yes, it's to assess the risk and opportunities. So we develop for our corporate clients what we call an ESG assessment. So it's a questionnaire, sector-based questionnaire. So we have 19 sectors, and for each sector we have specific questions to assess the risks, the ESG-related risk and opportunities of our clients. So it's a list of 30 to 50 questions for each sector. And inside this questionnaire, you have, environmental, social, and governance questions. And obviously, depending on the sector, it's more focusing on biodiversity. For instance, for the agriculture sector, we have more questions on biodiversity than for other sectors. So for this, so it's to assess, so we are very used to assessing the creditworthiness of our clients, but more and more we want to assess risk and opportunities, ESG risk and opportunities faced by our clients. So risk assessment first thing. So second thing, compliance with those sector policies. So I said a few words of our sector policy in Brazil, but we have an agriculture policy with several other criteria related to ESG. And so when we set this criteria, it's not to divest from one sector. We are not ideally, we would like to stay engaged in all the sectors, or nearly all of them. But okay, we have a policy on soy and beef in Brazil. We don't want to divest from soy in Brazil. Our target is to engage our clients into fighting deforestation. And so what is very important is that if we do it alone, it won't work. So really, our final goal is to engage our peers, engage other actors, to ask the same things more or less to our clients, to have more collective actions, and it will be much more efficient if we can act collectively. So it can be voluntary commitment from our peers and from our clients, or it can be regulatory. If it's regulatory, it's even more efficient and it's fine for us. So in France and now in Europe, we have laws on imported deforestation to limit as far as possible the impacts that imported goods to Europe have on deforestation, and so that's very fine for us to have this kind of laws, because it's much more efficient to have a collective actions. And then yes, we develop a specific sustainable finance tool to help these clients in their development, in their transition. So green bonds, sustainability-linked loans, or more specific tools depending on the countries and on the activities, to really be a partner of all our clients in this transition.
Thank you so much, Sebastian. And Jessica, you are also from UNEP-FI's, working not as a regulator, but you are also shaping the framework conditions in some ways through more voluntary initiatives. So can you help us understand from your principles for responsible banking, how are they being used to generate this type of change by the banking sector, also for them to be able to engage with the food sector to transition to more nature positive?
Absolutely. So just to take my microphone working, there we go. Just to take a step back, the UNEP Finance Initiative is an interface between the commitments, goals, ideals that are made at the United Nations and the reality of the mainstream financial sector. So with our banking members, we have more than 320 banks who have signed the principles for responsible banking. That represents half the world's banking assets. So it's very much the mainstream of banking. And within that group, currently around 35 have indicated interest and joined a working group to potentially set nature-positive targets for their portfolio. So the majority of PRB signatories have set climate targets, and now a growing number also want to set nature-positive targets for their entire portfolio. So we are now going through the process of creating guidance on how to do that, and obviously the TNFD is a really important tool to understand where the risks, impacts, dependencies, opportunities in the financial portfolio are, and how we can shift those away. Now, the actions that banks can take rely on having somewhere to shift their capital. So as banks go through these processes and identify whether a finance is nature positive or an engagement opportunity, what's the scope for engagement, or if it's an activity that should be shifted away from, over time, we have more and more conversations between the private finance sector and regulators to say, look, private finance is trying to lead, we're trying to do this, but we simply are held up by X or Y. So our head of UNEP-FI, Eric Usher, has often talked about UNEP-FI's theory of change as a dance between the public and private sector, where the private sector signals willingness to go further. It gives a signal to the public sector, and there's a conversation about what are the supportive regulations, what are the incentives needed, and to continue that dance along the stage to become more sustainable. Now, I think I wanted to pick up on the question from Christian here in terms of where this risk lies and where we want to avoid transferring it. Now, the World Bank recently did some fantastic work with commercial banks in emerging markets. And we have examples of assessments of portfolio risk for developed markets as well. And emerging markets are in the 60s and 70s percentages of dependence on nature in their portfolios. So they face a much higher risk, financial risk from ecosystem collapse than developed markets. At the same time, they have less ability to diversify their lending and investment activities. So when we have more transparency, we understand that the companies that are relying on ecosystems in emerging markets and we're transferring risk across from developed to emerging markets, there needs to be much more support and engagement to help our real economy actors to limit their risk, to help emerging markets. And actually, we're very happy that we've got some support now from the government of Switzerland, particularly SECO. We're going to be working in 4 emerging markets with banks in Peru, Colombia, South Africa, and Indonesia on understanding their specific risks and exactly having these conversations of where do we need the investment to manage the risks for the private financial sector in emerging markets. We heard yesterday it's actually much larger than often assumed. And again, that means there is a degree of risk that's being carried in our economies that is currently maybe invisible to regulators in both markets.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And do we have any questions or thoughts on the enabling environment? Otherwise, we are ready to move to the last chapter of the conversation, which is really around sort of bringing in the climate and nature nexus in this sector, or financing this sector. Doesn't look like there are any burning questions at the moment. Then I would like to turn to you, Victoria, because you've been working with CISL on a publication that's about to launch, which is exactly around how do you bring this conversation to corporates around expectations on climate nature from an asset management perspective. So can you sort of lift the lid a bit on what's to come?
Well, not too much, because it launches next week, and I wouldn't want to ruin it for everyone. But we've been working for a long time. It's a combination of the Banking Environment Initiative and the Investment Leaders Group, both of which are facilitated by CISL. And this is effectively, it's a handbook for asset managers and asset owners to engage along the investment chain on the topic of nature and finance and converging those. And so, it maps out effectively how you can connect the two and gives a framework for a very detailed framework for how you can implement that engagement if you're not accustomed to doing that or talking on that particular topic. So it's the last piece, or the most recent piece in a series of work on nature-related financial risks that CISL has produced. And so I urge you to go to their website and look at the previous publications too, because they all kind of lead into this, which was designed to launch around the time of TNFD to help facilitate those discussions.
And what's the perception from the corporate side that came out of this work?
Well, so far it's not been hugely tested because it's not been disseminated more broadly than the group. But from the interactions we've had with corporates on it, it's been very positive. And I think actually from one of the conversations, one of the panels this morning, somebody said, and I thought that's exactly it. Somebody from a corporate said it's about reframing this as a strategic commercial conversation. It's not about nature and climate. It's about how is your company, to your point, how is your company going to manage risks and really exploit opportunities as well as we merge these two topics. So the corporates are overwhelmingly positive about any any help and support that we can give them, and any guidance as to the direction or where they start.
And over to you, Melanie, to maybe build on that. What's your experience in terms of when you have the climate conversations and engagement and you start to bring on the nature agenda? What is the corporate reaction? Where are they most sort of literate in terms of the nature agenda?
I mean, it's a very diverse space. So if you compare small to large cap companies, or if you go into different locations, so also if you look at the political landscape, so it's difficult to make a general remark. I would say what has changed in the last 5 years maybe is that they take it seriously. So, as you said, they more welcome now support, guidance, because the first thing is, okay, I take it seriously, and then it's like, wow, but that's very complex. How do we manage that? How do we implement that? And especially, I think, for the smaller companies, then even more so. And I think overall, no matter if companies or investors, what is important is that there is this economic benefit, right? And it is there. So I think that's the only way how we really move forward. It has to make sense from an environmental perspective, but also from an economic perspective, so that we combine the two. And I'm personally convinced that's possible. That's how we invest, right? So we invest in companies that contribute to a successful transition, but they are also the beneficiaries, right? So it has to go hand in hand, I think, for really big change to happen.
Thank you, Melanie. We have time for a few more questions, if there are any questions from the audience at this point in time. Yeah?
Hi, my name is Tulin, and I work with the International Fund for Agricultural Development. My question is that about the cost of collateral, and how do you assess that cost of collateral in low-income countries when you decide to invest? Because sometimes it could be meaningless when the collateral is not as strong as in other countries. So it would be good to understand how you assess that in the process.
Is that for you, Sebastian, maybe?
Not that much, because actually we don't, to be honest, we don't invest much in farmers in emerging countries, because our activities are not there. So what we do is to have an impact on the supply chain through the traders and the big companies. So we know that we have to rely a lot on these farmers in emerging countries, otherwise the supply chain cannot work. But it's more up to our clients. So we discuss with our clients on this, but we don't deal directly with this collateral assessment. In emerging countries, not that much.
Thank you so much. Any more questions? Yeah.
My name is Dhiren Chandari. I'm from Kenya, Canadian also. Can you give us any example of a company that's done a fantastic job on this? Something that we can actually go to and learn from. I would really appreciate that.
I mean, for me, a fantastic company has to be passionate, sincere, first of all. So it's great if employees are really going for it, but I think it has to be supported from the top, so that it's really realized, okay, it's crucial for us, it's a great economic opportunity for us, and we integrate this topic into our company. So we don't have a sustainability team that works over there, and we consult them for the sustainability report, for the annual report, and maybe we bring them along for company meetings. So they really are an integral part of the company. They work together with the product management team. They work together with the people developing new solutions, bring it to market, you know. So this is for me important. So this adds to this credibility. And then just puts in the work, right? It's complex, so net zero by 2050, these high-level targets, and we want to change the world. That's maybe a starting point, right? But then how do you implement it? How do you make it tangible? How do you create working blocks that can really be implemented, that also then the single people that have to implement them, understand them, can work with them? So I think this for me is a great company, so that it really takes it seriously, implements it really down to the micro level.
Sorry, I was looking for an example.
You were looking for a name.
What names?
Yeah, I'm afraid that's difficult for me because in my capacity here as a fund manager of a listed company, but I'm happy. What I can do is I can send you some information, then I can give you also some names, yeah.
I could give you a name of a company that I heard present this morning that I don't invest in, and actually we were in the same round table this morning, which is Nestle. And I came to that conversation with a number of preconceptions, and I was very impressed to your point about how the sustainability aspect is entirely folded into the commercial strategy of the business, and just the level of depth that has gone into thinking about regenerative agriculture, how to accelerate a transition to that up their supply chain. And I've far from being in a position to judge whether they're fantastic or not, but it was interesting to see, I mean, you know, the poster child of multinational food companies talking in such an informed way. I don't know if you've obviously been working with them on this project, so
yeah, they're in our working group on making the TNFD guidance or specific for the agricultural sector. So they do see it, and they have seen it for a long time as both a physical and a transition risk now with all this new deforestation-free regulation coming. So they've taken it very seriously, of course, because now it's suddenly not just a disclosure issue; it's a license to operate with these new types of regulation issues, right? So, but there's a long way to go also for Nestlé, of course, since it's such a large company. And but I think what is telling about your question is also if you go on the London Stock Exchange, there's actually a listing category called a natural asset company, and it's empty, right? Because it's this is not even sunrise industry. The sun has not even tipped, you know. Exactly. So I think we're going to scratch our heads finding names for you, Sebastian.
Yes, your question is key, but it's very tricky. I will make two cases. So either you consider small companies specialized in sustainable transition. So I gave you names of companies in which we invested. Phoenix to fight food waste, or we have in France Printemps des Terres, which is specialized in investing in degraded land to restore land and these kind of things. But they do fantastic things, but they are very small and they are at the beginning of the process. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have big companies. So the problem with big companies is that the agro-food market is very competitive. So it's very difficult to them to do something completely out of scope from the rest of their competitors. But what I can say all the same is that I'm convinced that at least in Europe, the big agro-industrial company are very convinced of the challenges, of the issues, and they're quite engaged in this. So you have Nestlé, you have Danone, you have Unilever. So I think the three of them are doing very good jobs. They have carbon neutrality plans. They have a regenerative agriculture plan. So they are really committed to this. So they do what they can to keep in the business, because if they sell their products twice as much as the other one, there will be an issue. But I'm quite convinced that at the top and in all these, at least 3 European companies, and there may be many others, they are really convinced that there is something to tackle here, and they are seeing how they can, fight climate change, prepare climate adaptation, restore biodiversity. So maybe they are not 100% fantastic, because it's very difficult for a big, large corporate, but clearly they do fantastic things and they have many very good ideas.
Thank you so much. We have time for a last question, and then we need to go into closing remarks.
Thank you. My name is Vera Lalchevska, and I'm a founder and president of the Geneva Coalition. The Geneva Coalition is a public-private partnership. Actually, it aims to be a public-private partnership with the aim to abolish child sexual abuse. And my question is simple. This is the third time I've come to the Building Bridges conference. I have yet to hear the topic of child sexual abuse in this sustainability, and yet children are the most vulnerable levels of our society, and if we don't invest in the mental health of children, we won't even have leaders on the environmental front. And we're now facing statistics which are huge. I mean, Foreign Policy Analytics just came out with a figure of 1 billion children having been abused. And so my question to you is, what are the chances that all of you sitting here, perhaps not UNEP because you're focused on the environment, but that you have, that you join my partnership and that you dedicate the same amount of finance and focus on children as on biodiversity? And how do I go about that, to speak to you?
Well, from my perspective, I'd want to know more about your partnership. We partner with Exodus Road already, which does a lot of work in human trafficking, but children particularly. And the way that we have addressed this so far is that in listed markets, we're trying to invest in our broader impact funds. We're trying to invest across the SDGs where they are investable, and where they are not investable through for-profit companies, which we would term to be Goal 16 particularly. We give a portion of our AUM every year to a cluster of charities specifically around rule of law, corruption, and trafficking, because to your point, none of these environmental problems are solved if you have a country that's rife with corruption and if it's got no sense of how to treat its own children. But in terms of giving it the same prominence as biodiversity, the argument needs to be articulated more broadly and more clearly for why this particular topic is as relevant as seismic for the survival of society. I'm not making a judgment whether it is or it isn't, but with nature and climate, that is very evident. It gets a lot, increasing amounts of airtime in the press, and companies are themselves addressing this. As an investor, we talked a lot about working together with companies. We can't invest in something if it's not on the corporate radar either. So it requires a joined-up approach.
Thank you, Victoria, and we're almost out of time, so we soon have to go into closing remarks. I want to thank everybody for wonderful questions and for having this conversation with us. I think just to sum up, I think your question was wonderful. It just really put on the radar that this is early days. This is not even sunrise industries. We are almost before that, but that we need smart regulation that can really shorten the time horizon and shift the risks. We really need smart transition that's incentivized by engagement and also by financial instruments. And then we also, of course, also need to take that risk to invest in those pure play companies that can really challenge the status quo of what we eat, how we eat, and how we produce it, because the 80% of biodiversity loss, that should be a massive opportunity to shift that one pathway or the other. But we have 5 minutes. I would like to ask each of you as panelists to share just 1 or 2 sentences to peers in the audience. What should they do differently, or what should they do on Monday if they want to start to engage in this topic with their work in the food sector?
Right. Well, I think we have a mix of people representing financial institutions and other. So those in financial institutions, I think we really encourage that you apply the TNFD to understand risk, opportunities, impact, and dependencies in your portfolio, and that will start bringing more transparency into markets. For anyone else, and including those who work for financial institutions, is to take a look at your own portfolio, no matter how modest as mine is. We all invest, including in our state pensions, and we want to understand, are those pensions going to support us in the future, and are they invested sustainably? And as consumer power, there's a very strong lever that we can pull to ask questions and show the demand and the interest in this topic from financial institutions.
Yeah, my take would be no matter who you are, what role you have, just start already now, maybe don't wait until tomorrow, and just don't wait for the big solution, for more transparency, for whatever you're waiting for, just start. And I think we need all the bits and pieces everyone can contribute. So that would already, I think, make massive change. So that would be my plea. Thank you.
And I have two things. One isn't tomorrow, but next week. Please download the CISL Let's Discuss Nature with Climate reference book and give feedback if you have any, because that's really helpful. And the other thing is that the social aspect of this has come up from a few different perspectives in this conversation, which has been really interesting and actually a surprise to me because it very rarely does. And so if you are engaging with this topic, with nature and climate, then please consider adding people to that and figuring out how you can link that in.
So I'm convinced that the TNFD provides a very, very important and relevant framework to address all these topics. So the target is not to be fully compliant with the TNFD from year one. It's much too ambitious for most of us. The target is to get started. So really to guide, so the TNFD provides many guidance documents. So the target is to get started and to use this guidance document to increase the quality of the assessment, of the disclosure, of the monitoring of all our impact dependencies and risks and opportunities related to nature. So all of us can get started on this, use the documents, and check how in each of our organization we can use it to increase the quality of the way we deal with these challenging topics.
Thank you so much, Sebastian. Thank you so much, Victoria, Melanie, and Jessica, for a wonderful conversation. And thank you so much for being so engaged and co-creating this call to action for all of us to act different on Monday. Thank you.